I'm 18-year-old male and my dad is 55. I have a pet lab that's about 3 years old. He used to stay in the house but got too big and my dad didn't want him inside anymore. I had to make a doghouse for him in our backyard. Anyway, I live in a pretty rural area in the US and there are 6 houses and a lot of trees where I live. Our backyard is actually on the edge of a small forest. About 2 weeks ago, when we decided to make a doghouse and all for my dog, I hated the idea of it. He's always been a good and loyal dog that I've absolutely loved, so I would always make sure to spend a good hour or so every night outside with him, as he got used to sleeping outside. During the day, he ran errands with me for the most part, so he was really only out back at night. After the first 2 days of me being out there with him, I would hear a sound coming from the small forest. Every time I heard the sound, my dog would bark. I figured it was the sound of a cricket or some sort of other small animal that did it. It would happen in random intervals, so I didn't suspect much. After about 4 or 5 days, I kept hearing the noises and my dog Simon would sure enough bark in reply. I started getting agitated with him because I thought we'd wake up the neighbors and I patted him to make him relax a little bit. It wasn't until I patted him that I noticed just how shaken up he was and how his fur almost stood up. Since he's a black dog, you can't see him very well at night. This continued every night for the rest of the week, and I got so tired of it that I asked a friend if he'd lend me a spotlight so I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from. So following night, I was out with my dog on the back porch. I should mention my backyard is relatively large, and sure enough, I heard the click-click sound. I pulled out the spotlight and aimed it at the spot I heard it coming from, and I was shocked by exactly what I saw. The spotlight shone on an elderly man, probably in his 50s or 60s, with a greasy-looking gray beard and ripped pants but no shirt. I was pretty surprised, and I'm sure he was too. As I was about to say something, my voice got caught in my throat, and the man almost tripped trying to run away. I was a bit freaked out and I didn't know what to do, so I let my dog in for the night. I really didn't feel right about what I saw, so I told my dad, and we called the police. It was around 11 p.m. when they showed up, and I gave a description, and they went off to take a look but didn't find much, considering how dark it was, and they couldn't go very far in. The next night was relatively silent until I went to bed. At around midnight, I heard Simon barking again and went outside to investigate. I turned the spotlight on and I saw the same man with what looked like a shard of glass or mirror in his right hand on the other side of our fence. I yelled at him and told him to get the heck away from our house, and I heard a hysterical laugh from him as he ran away. At that point, I was really worried, considering that we've only been living in the area about 4 months and lived in a relatively safe and populated place my whole life. We called the police again and again, and they searched with no results, but they told me they would investigate in the morning when it's brighter outside. When they came and looked the next day, it turned out there was a tent about half a mile into the small forest that they suspect the man I saw was probably living in. They found small bones all over the place and what looked like cat skulls and other small animal skulls. I never had a direct encounter with the man, but I'm honestly starting to believe the man's homeless and has been trying to get my dog's attention every night to kill him and eat him or some other sick plan. I've been pretty stressed the last week, worrying that something might happen to him. There hasn't been much the police have been able to do since there doesn't seem to be any way of finding him. It's been about a week since I've heard the sinister clicking, so I'm hoping to get the hint and packed up, but he just looks so mentally deranged. I'm almost sick to my stomach thinking of him doing anything to my dog or anyone else's animal. Okay, so buckle up because this is going to get weird. This isn't something unknown amongst my friends and the people local to me, as I live in quite a small town. So in grade 9, I would have been about 13. I had no friends. I was and still am kind of weird, and it threw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together and we had begun talking and building our friendship. George was very nice and we had a lot in common. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because the people from his elementary school commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted that he wanted to go to this high school because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone to eat. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had, but he always declined. Then one day in English class, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. The note said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back that I would sit with him, and we hardly spoke the rest of the period. I got a really strange vibe from him. So it's lunchtime. I see him sitting at the end of the row. Our cafeteria consisted of a large harvest table and bench. It was not separate tables with chairs like you'd see in a restaurant, but rather long tables with benches on either side. I go to sit down and he says, "No, let's go outside to talk." So I agree. He looked genuinely upset and I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on the curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me that it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who befriended me first. He told me I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. So, now that he's alone, I was obligated to eat with him. It was actually a bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends and that there wouldn't be any issues, and he could even make some new friends. I told him I had enough friendship to spread around and that he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the rage in his eyes. He grabbed my arm and said, "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got completely freaked out at that point and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where most people were around. After this day, I started getting weird messages to my email. I'll never forget the first email I was sent. All it said, "All women are Satan. The devil lies in you all." I didn't recognize the email address and assumed it was some sort of internet troll trying to scare me. Remember chain emails? Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. Women are the devil, or Satan lives in all women. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed it was weird, but also agreed that it was probably some random person trying to scare people. But my one friend, Stacy, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard stories about why he came to her school instead of going to the high school his grade 8 graduating class was going to. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom actually got a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that sounded insane and I didn't believe it. I was still having lunch with George on alternate days and we were still friendly during English class, but I really wanted to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for second semester. I was honestly very happy about this because I knew I'd have a different lunch period than George and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly dissociate myself from him, but I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together, which at the time I thought was very nice of him to say, but the feelings were not mutual. Eventually, I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained that he was overwhelming me and that I needed a little bit of space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell, just agreed to give me space, which lasted about 2 days before the emails started getting worse. They started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. I know I should have done that sooner. My mom called the police. The police informed the school, and the school locked up the email on their records and found that it was George, sending me the nasty emails all along. George was suspended and wouldn't even look at me anymore. I was actually relieved. 1 year after we graduated high school, George and his mom went for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. He had a psychotic break. When the police found him, he said it was a car accident, but when they questioned him about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her and trying to release the devil from his mom's soul. He pleaded insanity against the murder of his mom. He was found not criminally responsible for her murder. I've been hiking sections of the AT for about 6 years. The trail community is genuinely one of the warmest groups of people I've ever encountered anywhere. Strangers share food and water, and you develop this easy trust with people you've only known for about half an hour because the trail creates it naturally. I say that because what happened last September was so far outside anything I'd ever experienced out there that I still have trouble placing it in the same context as every other trip I've taken. I was doing a 5-day solo section through southwestern Virginia. Familiar terrain, good weather forecasted, a stretch I've been wanting to hit for 2 seasons. I had my resupply figured out, my campsites planned, and the whole thing mapped. Days 1 and 2 were perfect. Cool mornings and manageable climbs. The kind of hiking that reminds you of exactly why you do it. I got to the shelter site on day 2's end around 5 in the afternoon. The lean-to style 3-sided. Fits maybe 6 people comfortably. There was already one other person there when I arrived. A man who set up his gear at the far left end of the shelter and was sitting with his back against the wall eating something from a pouch. I said hey, and he looked at me and said hey back, and that was it, which was fine. Some people on the trail talk, some don't. You read the energy and you match it. His energy was leave me alone, and I respected that a lot. I set up on the opposite end, made my dinner, filtered water from the creek nearby, and got myself sorted for the night. After dark, I was in my sleeping bag reading on my phone when he spoke for the first time beyond a single hey. He asked how long I was out for. I said about 5 days. Asked him the same. He said he wasn't sure yet, which is a thing people say sometimes on the trail, though hikers especially play it loose with the timeline. I didn't think anything of it. He asked if I was alone. I told him I was meeting friends further up the trail, which wasn't actually true, but which I always say when somebody I don't know asks that question in a remote location. Just a habit I'd built over years of solo hiking. He didn't respond to that, and we both went quiet. I went back to my phone. Something woke me up at around 2 in the morning. I lay still on my back and looked out from the shelter into the dark. The trees were moving a little bit from the wind, but the sound that woke me wasn't wind. It was close, inside the shelter close. I turned my head slowly and looked towards the other end of the shelter. He was sitting up in his back watching me. Not his phone, not the tree line, and not the sky. Definitely me. Just sitting completely upright in his sleeping bag with his hands in his lap, looking directly at me from maybe 8 feet away in the dark. I looked at him for a second and then looked up at the shelter ceiling like I'd just woken up disoriented and was getting my bearings. Bought myself a few seconds to think. I said something about needing to use the bathroom and got up and grabbed my headlamp and walked out of the shelter towards the tree line like I was heading to dig a cat hole. Once I was in the trees and out of the direct sight line of the shelter, I stopped and stood still and thought through my options. Going back into that shelter to sleep was not one of them. My pack was still in there. My food, my extra layers, my first aid kit. I had my headlamp, my phone with 15% battery, the clothes I was sleeping in, and my boots, which I'd put on before leaving the shelter out of a habit I developed specifically for situations where you might need to move fast. I circled wide through the trees and came back to the shelter from a different angle and watched it from the dark for a few minutes. He was standing at the front of the shelter now, at the open side, looking out in the direction I'd gone, just standing there waiting for me to come back. I went back to my pack as fast as I could from the side of the shelter he wasn't facing, got my hands on it and pulled it out without making a sound, and moved back into the trees before he turned around. I heard him say something about me. Not loud, almost conversational. Said I didn't have to leave. I was already moving. I hiked in the dark for about 50 minutes using my headlamp on its lowest setting. The trail was familiar enough for my planning that I could keep pace without stopping constantly to check my map. I put as much distance between me and that shelter as I could manage before I found a flat spot off trail far enough from the path that I felt okay stopping. I set up my bivvy without stakes, got inside fully clothed with my boots still on, and lay there until first light, listening to every sound the forest made. I didn't sleep. At dawn I got moving again, and hiked hard until I hit a road crossing around 9 in the morning, where a trail angel had a water cache set up. There was a retired couple there with a truck who offered trail magic, coffee and granola bars, and I sat with them for an hour and told them what had happened. The man wrote down the shelter location and the description I gave and said he was going to call the ranger station when he got back into cell phone range that afternoon. He took my number and said he'd let me know if anything came of it. I finished the remaining 3 days of my section and came out at the planned trailhead without seeing the man again. The trail angel texted me 4 days after I finished, said the rangers had gone to check the shelter site and found it empty, found some gear left behind. A sleeping pad and a stuffed sack with some food in it, but no person. Said they'd flagged it and would keep an eye on the area. Nobody ever followed up beyond that. I've thought about that moment of waking up and finding him sitting there watching me more times than I can count. 8 feet away in a 3-sided shelter in the middle of the night with nobody else for miles in any direction. Just sitting there in his sleeping bag with his hands folded in his lap, staring at me while I slept. I don't know how long he'd been doing it before I woke up. I don't know what he thought was going to happen when I came back from the bathroom. The thing that bothers me the most, and the thing I keep landing on when I think about it, is what he said when I was already in the trees moving away from him. He said I didn't have to leave. Not in an angry or panicked way. Not like somebody whose intentions had just been correctly read and who knew it. Just calm and almost confused, like my leaving was the strange part of the whole situation. Like whatever was about to happen was so normal to him that me walking away in the dark was the thing that didn't make sense. I do hike solo still. I'm not going to stop because of one night on one section of one trail, but I don't stay in shelters anymore. I camp off trail, away from designated sites, in spots that I pick myself that aren't on any map, and I sleep with my boots on every single night. I was 19 years old and the only female working at a shop specializing in automotive batteries and things of that nature. I had been working there long enough to realize that most of the clientele was male and oftentimes made for some awkward situations. For instance, I would get talked down to and patronized quite a bit, or even flirted with to the point where I would be somewhat uncomfortable. I have really thick skin though, so either way I was typically unbothered. One day during a particularly busy rush, a very tall and well-built man, who was maybe in his mid-30s, came through my line. I consider myself to be pretty good at reading people, and this guy had some very, very strange energy. Definitely seemed off. However, it was my job to be professional and assist whoever came through the line. I brushed aside the uneasy feelings. I just wanted to ring this guy out and get through the rest of the line that was now trailing out the front door. I greeted him and talked to him as I would any other customer while I was processing his transaction. Things were going fine until he realized I was almost done. He started stalling, making up weird excuses as to why he couldn't use certain credit cards, how he needed me to put this battery on hold, and how he would be back. I told him I would hold it for him and that he could come back whenever he found the time. I figured he would leave at that point, but he just stood there and stared at me. Now that I think about it, he was more staring through me than at me. I was a bit uneasy but kept my polite professional demeanor. Sir, if you're not purchasing anything at the moment, may I ask that you step aside so I can assist the other customers? He completely disregarded my question and, in a slow, raspy voice, asked, So, what's your name? I didn't wear a name tag specifically for reasons like this. Customers had found me on Facebook before and it was actually very weird. Thinking quickly, I threw out my nickname. It's Ria. Ria, he said, as he kept staring. I just smiled and awkwardly said, Yeah, that's me. By this point, my manager had realized what was going on, and he proceeded to ask the man to step aside as well. After hearing it from my manager, the man walked to a corner of the store, by some shelving, and continued to stare while I was ringing the rest of the customers out. A bit of time went by and the line had cleared up, but he was still standing there, staring and now smiling the most sickening smile I think I've ever seen. It made my skin crawl. Of course, my manager and coworker saw this too, and my coworker grabbed my arm and said, Come on, dude, let's go out back. As we're walking to the stock room, my manager asked the man if there was anything else he needed. The man muttered that there wasn't any left. I wish that was the end of it, but of course he had to come back in to purchase the battery. When he came back the next day, we again had a line. He let people go ahead of him and waited until I was free before coming up to the counter to make his purchase. I greeted him again and tried to remain professional, but it was hard considering how creeped out I was. I was again met with the same stare and that same freaky smile. I can't remember the entire conversation, but at one point, the question he was asking started to become more and more personal, weird or inappropriate enough for my coworker to cut in. He looked at the guy and then at me and said, Ria, go take your break. Before he basically pushed me out of the way of the computer and rang the guy out. I stayed in the back until my manager came and got me, telling me it was safe to come out. We were all pretty creeped out, but thought that was the end of it. A few days went by and we had all mostly forgotten about this creepy dude until he walked in again. This time, though, he didn't look through the store, didn't approach the counter, and didn't say a word to anybody. He just stood, jacked hood pulled up over his head in the corner of the store, staring and smiling. The smile had become even weirder and wider even, and more sinister looking. And at this point, I started to freak the heck out. I started shaking and feeling sick to my stomach. Then my manager cut the horrible tension by pretty much screaming at him, Hey, I'm sick of you coming in my store and pulling this kind of crap. The creep paid him no mind and kept on staring. This pissed my manager off, and he walked out from around the corner and told the dude, Look, man, if you don't quit coming in here and staring at her, I will not hesitate to call the cops. What you're doing is harassment, so you need to get the heck out of my store. At the mention of police, this dude's smile dropped, and he slowly sauntered out of the store. We never saw him again, but I was immediately taken off closing shifts due to fear that the man would come back and try to catch me when I was alone. I definitely dealt with my fair share of creeps at that job, but this guy was by far the most weird. We all seem to have that one ex that just grinds our gears, but mine is far creepier than the average drunk texting asshole. About 3 years ago, I was in a long-distance relationship with a younger man, meaning he was only 17 at the time, while I turned 19 in the relationship. His name is Peter. Peter was not a nice person to say the least. He thought that the first impressions he made on people were the only ones he needed, and as such, he stopped being nice, polite, or reasonable to people after the first meeting. I was young and saw past this, thinking I could somehow change him. However, this abuse towards people around me and myself eventually became too much, and I broke off the relationship with him. The breakup went smoothly, all things considered. Except he wanted me to say the words so he could play the victim. This had been a core element of our fighting because he hinted that he wanted the breakup, but instead of just saying it, he kept me on the hook and became even more abusive. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point was that I thought of the matter as resolved and entered a loving relationship with my current boyfriend shortly after. Then came the day when Peter wanted to get his belongings back. I texted him a list of everything he had left in my apartment, and he okayed that it was everything. We also made an appointment for him to stop by my apartment around 3 p.m. the following Thursday. I had no intentions of letting him back into my home nor being alone with him, since he suddenly seems to have many mood swings after seeing me in another relationship. He has been blocked from my Facebook account, but somehow knew I was in a new relationship, which was a major red flag to me and my boyfriend. Thursday came, and I felt eager to just be done with it. My boyfriend and I are walking home from high school when my phone rings. It's Peter. He yells at me that he has now been waiting at the train station for over an hour. I try to reason with him, agree to meet him there with his belongings since he needs to catch a train. My boyfriend walks with me to the train station, but we arrive only to find it vacant. I live in a small town, and the train station is mostly used during rush hours in the morning and evening. It is also located rather bizarrely among normal residences, and there are a lot of alleyways leading all over the town from there. I get a text stating that Peter can see us but won't come out of hiding when my boyfriend is there. We leave his stuff on a bench at the station, calmly replying that I'm not actually interested in a meeting with him. When I say calmly, I mean that my reply is calm. I'm shaking and my boyfriend is furious over this child's play. On our way home, I receive another text. This time he states that he has a gift for me and it's in my mailbox. This freaks us out more because this indicates that he might be waiting at my home. It is entirely possible that he watched us at the train station and then ran all the way to my apartment. However, there is no trace of him and nothing except a bill in my mailbox. By now, we figure that he is acting up out of spite and proceeds to ignore the bombardment of texts, calls, and so forth that follows that day. After a while, life returns to normal. Then I get another call, this time from my ex's older brother, who was worried about his sibling. Apparently, he disappeared, taking one of his brother's gas pistols. I am speechless, but I since haven't seen anything. I shake it off as another childish act. The same day, my boyfriend sees police officers walking around the basement staircase on the exterior of the house we lived in while doing some grocery shopping. He did this every day around 4 p.m. The next day, we are contacted by my boyfriend's mother. In the newspaper, there is a description of an unnamed young man from the same town as Peter, who has been arrested for attempted robbery of the pizza place I lived above. He was armed with a knife, a gas pistol, and lighter fluid, while stating that he was not attempting a robbery but was there to visit his ex. Contacting the police, I discovered that he also had a mask, fake papers, and a wig in a duffel bag, which he had thrown down on the staircase when, around 4 p.m., he had jumped a fence and tried to enter the pizza place. This means that my boyfriend went out the front door while my ex was hiding right beside the front door arm. I've never been that freaked out before. The sad truth is that my ex never got charged with anything because he's a minor, has a father with a military background, and has money. I write this now because after 3 years, I thought that this horror story was finally a closed chapter. That was until I received a declaration of love from a fake email account signed Peter. I received this just 2 weeks ago.